Hi, I'm Jeremy Crosby.
And I'm Nick Boucher. We're your hosts for the program that's all about your city, Talking Fitchburg.
Every weekday, we pull together the news, events, and information you need to stay on top of what's happening in the city of Fitchburg.
Find Talking Fitchburg on cable TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and our live stream on the web. Plus, you can find all our headlines and stories on Facebook, YouTube, and our video on demand service. This is your city.
Keep up with Talking Fitchburg and the issues affecting you and your neighbors.
Want to know what's happening in your city? Get Notify Me messages from the City of Fitchburg. Visit fitchburgwi.gov on your computer or mobile device and select the big Notify Me button on the left. Enter your email and/or phone number, whichever is best for you to get notifications. Scroll down the list and select all the topics you're interested in to receive email or text messages about. You'll be notified every time one of your topics is updated. Sign up for Notify Me, one more way to keep up with your Fitchburg government.
I call to order the meeting of the Committee of the Whole on February 26, 2025 at 7 o'clock p.m. First item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Next item of business is roll call. Administrator, can you help us out?
Absolutely. Alder Allen.
I am so here.
Mayor Arata-Frada. Here. Alder Dantzler.
Here.
Here.
Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst. Here. Alder Jetzer.
Here.
Alder Maldonado.
Here.
Alder Vaffadari.
Here.
Alder Wheeler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Next item of business is approval of minutes. I'll need a motion on the January 22nd, 2025 Committee of the Whole minutes.
So moved.
Motion to approve by Alder Allen, second by Alder Herbst. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business is public appearances for non-agenda items. I know this is an agenda item, but okay, come on up. We have one member of the public, David Haight, here to speak. You have 3 minutes.
So I'm going to talk about water quality standard, which is slightly different than the stormwater utility per se. And so this is the famous MS4 permit. And one of the things I think that people don't understand is how the building of BMPs and water quality interact. So the way that the Clean Water Act is set up is that you build facilities that are engineered and they've been tested in the field so that there's a fair certainty as to what kind of pollutants will be removed at what kind of rate. And as long as you've got a receiving water body that is not impaired, which is to say it doesn't violate water quality standards for those pollutants, you go ahead, you build your facility, and it's assumed that it's going to work. And there's no requirement that you, as you build facilities, that you somehow monitor each, and as you get closer and closer to impairing the water, that somehow you can adjust. Now, certainly you could do that, but there's no requirement for that. But typically what happens is that you've got a capacity in a stream, and you're allowed to build such that the pollutants that go in get to the capacity where that stream becomes impaired. Once that stream becomes impaired, that no longer holds. The permit says, this permit does not authorize discharges that the department determines will cause or have reasonable potential to cause or contribute to an exceedance above any applicable water quality standards. So if you look at what I sent out the other week with the pictures in it, you'll see that coming right out of Quarry Hill, right out of the stormwater ponds, it's polluted. Okay? So what that says is that everything that goes into the pond and everything that comes out of the pond violates this. Okay? So, and then wetlands. That all the discharges have to meet the wetland water quality standard, not when it's built, but forever. Like in the case of the sub-zero wetland, which is a restored wetland. There are massive violations of NR 103 there, and it's an ongoing violation. The city is required to report those violations to the DNR. What's the requirements of the permit? Respond in a timely manner to citizen complaints. Coordinate this requirements of this permit internally with co-permittees agencies, departments, programs. Ensure municipal officials and appropriate staff know about it. Implement the requirements of this plan in a manner that's consistent with recommendations in the Dane County Water Quality Plan. So anything that is a recommendation in the conditions of approval of expanding the urban services boundary are a requirement to be met in this permit. And incorporate the requirements of this permit in the development of master plans, neighborhood plans, development plans, and other comprehensive planning activities to address water quality impacts. And undertake actions required by this permit in a manner that's consistent and conformance with other applicable regulatory programs.
David, your time is up.
Specifically to include comprehensive plans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to add for the Common Council, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Haight, for your comments. He had referenced some photos that had been sent a couple of weeks ago that were included in the council or an email to the council. That complaint that he referenced, city staff did look into in a timely manner, addressed any of the deficiencies that were noted with the developer of that particular site. And we did ask Mr. Haight in response to that email if that complaint had been handled to his had been handled in a timely manner. And if not, to please let me know. I've not heard anything back from that. And then I would add, Mr. Haight, if there is any violations at the sub-zero pond you're referencing, if you would like to forward specifically to me or Ben Schulte or Tim Volker, our Public Works Director and Stormwater Engineers, what those specific violations may be, we'll do our due diligence to take a look at those. But at this point in time, I'm not aware of any of the violations that you're referencing. So we would need more information to be able to ascertain whether or not those are violations. So thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Our next item of business is agenda items, and we have one agenda item today, 6A, Stormwater Utility Overview. And I believe, David, would you like to speak on this as well? So if you'd come to the mic, we'll start with public comments, and then we'll move on to a presentation.
One of the things that's true about stormwater utility is so the Board of Public Works is a three-headed beast. It's got the responsibilities of a traditional Board of Public Works, which is overseeing all the public works in the city, but it's also the Municipal Utility Corporation for Fund 1, which is water and sewer. It's also a Municipal Utility Commission for the stormwater utility. What's that mean? Well, so if you read the ordinance, it says that it's a business. The Board of Public Works is the CEO. It is to take charge and manage hiring, planning, et cetera, down the line. And I've been to many meetings, and the assertion has been made, and I have no reason to doubt it, that the Board of Public Works has always, since the beginning of time, delegated this down the chain, and that function that is put in city ordinances by this institution doesn't happen. That planning does not happen. So that's why we have Engineer Schulte here giving the presentation, because what's in the ordinances isn't happening. So how can there be planning? How can there be coordination? How can there be anything if what happens is it gets delegated down the chain and then it gets sent to the county for one person sitting in the corner to approve things one at a time? Something is very wrong here, that we can just abdicate the responsibility, one, for doing it, and two, for oversight about doing it. This is a very, very large problem, because it indicates a lack of control by the council. It's not dissimilar from the neighborhood plans being moved out of the Plan Commission, which is a statutory body that's responsible for it. You don't just get to pick what you want to do or not do. There's reasons why these things are put in. We've been bequeathed the wisdom of the ages here. We should follow them unless there's a good reason not to. So what's up? And there's not much more I can say than that. But that's a foundational reason why we have the water quality planning, the water quality issues and water quality violations, because that whole thing that's supposed to be the planning, evaluation, budgeting, long-term monitoring, it's not there. It's just not there. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Can I say something?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, David, I want to tell you something that, I would like you to come and give us a specific, because you come here and say that we don't know what we are doing, that we are doing everything incorrect, we don't follow ordinance, we don't follow that. I want you to tell me in an email or come here and give us a specific, because I want to tell you we are following the ordinance, okay?
Public comment's complete. Sorry,
okay,
David.
No, I'm done, but I had to say it.
Yeah, Mayor, of course. Thank you. So here tonight is Ben Schulte, our environmental engineer, to talk about our stormwater utility. In my 5 years on council, we have not had a presentation at committee in the whole about the stormwater utility, and it is a topic that is of much interest to I know the Resource Conservation Commission, the Plan Commission, and this body. People get complaints about it as alders, and then also the public is obviously very interested in as well. So we really appreciate you coming out here tonight. We have fantastic staff in Public Works that works on this, so we're happy to hear your presentation. Take it away, Ben.
All right. Well, thanks for having me back. I appreciate the time to discuss the stormwater utility. So if you want to bring the slides up, we can kind of get right into it here.
And we can see them.
Yep. All right. The slides are on the TV there. You can all see them. Perfect. All right. So really, this is intended to be, I'll say, a high-level overview on stormwater utilities, the Fitchburg stormwater utility, how the stormwater utility is funded, maintenance responsibilities, regulatory requirements, and then just a few selected projects of that stormwater utility funding has been used to complete. So should have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. All right, so a little background on just stormwater utilities in Wisconsin in general. So it wasn't until 1998, really, where the state of Wisconsin started to allow municipalities to establish service charges, basically to fund construction and operation of stormwater and surface water collection treatment systems. So, I mean, really, it's fairly new when you think about it. It certainly hasn't been around for that long. But since that time, looking at the American Public Works Association's numbers, in 2023, there were 123 stormwater utilities operating in Wisconsin. So, there's about 200 cities, about 400 villages, 123 of those municipalities, probably more now, have stormwater utilities. And stormwater utilities they're different than your water utility or your sanitary sewer utility, as they fall under the definition of a public utility under Wisconsin state statute. So stormwater utilities does not fall under that definition of a public utility, and therefore the PSC is much less involved. For example, they're not requiring PSC approval for rate changes or constructing facilities, whereas that's if you're changing your water rates, that goes to the PSC. Now, that being said, the PSC isn't totally removed from stormwater utilities. They do have kind of some vague requirements when it comes to rates. Namely, they have to be reasonable and they can't unjustly discriminate. So those are really kind of the two things that the rates have to be able to comply with. So you got to be reasonable and they can't just unjustly discriminate. And if there's any kind of complaints, or if there's a business that maybe thinks that there's an unreasonable charge, then the PSC may hear that complaint. So I do believe they'll hear a couple complaints a year about stormwater utility charges that someone believes is unjust or unreasonable. So the Fitchburg stormwater utility goes back to really the late 90s. So this is when some of those more, you've got Section 402 of the EPA Clean Water Act, which we'll talk a little bit more. But starting in the late 90s, people were looking at stormwater a little bit more seriously, putting in, establishing regulations. And it was becoming less of an afterthought than maybe it had been in the past. So I think it was in 1998, the DNR basically notified the city that they were going to have this new permit, that they're going to have all these new requirements that they would have to comply with. That's actually the first version of the Wisconsin Discharge Pollution Elimination System, called the WIPDES permit. So that was the first version that the city received. It was back in the early 2000s. Now we're on the version number 4. So that was the version that David had brought up. Would be the 4th version of that permit. So basically, with some of these new requirements, the city essentially realize that they have a need for some consistent funding. They need to have, some sort of consistent funding source to be able to comply with permit requirements, but then also just to complete maintenance of stormwater infrastructure, your pipe, your inlets, your greenways, and all that. So in 2001, financing report was completed for the city. So this financing report basically kind of took a look at some of the assets, future projects, figured out, all right, how much do we have to budget over the next several years to get the tasks done that need to be done. And based on that, there was a rate formula developed. And that's, in 2002, the stormwater utility was officially established, and people started getting those stormwater utility fees at that time. So the ordinance that discusses the stormwater utility is Chapter 40, Article 5 in Fitchburg Code. So you can look through that, and you'll see it outlines the rates, the fee calculations, credit policy. So that is one important piece of the Fitchburg stormwater utility is that there is a credit policy. So if someone has a privately owned pond or infiltration basin, whatever it may be on their property, they can apply to get a credit to kind of reduce their rates a little bit. But they have to, it's a process. They have to provide engineering calculations, show that peak rates or flows off the site are being reduced, or they're infiltrating water. And that kind of ties in with having a reasonable and fair stormwater utility, right? If someone has a site that has this big pond and there's really not any water coming off of it, well, they should be allowed to get a credit for that.
Ben,
Yep.
Are any of those some of the BMPs in our modeling? Are those included in our modeling?
Some of them are. Frankly, there's not been that many credit applications, but there are a few where sites have gotten these credits. And as long as we have the as-built information, so, we physically have documentation that this BMP was constructed correctly, and we have the stormwater maintenance agreement for that BMP, then it's likely a BMP that is currently included in the TMDL model, yes. All right, so just a brief overview of the funding. There's different customer classes. There's residential, so that could be single family, duplex, or multifamily. If you're single family or duplex, you get charged a flat rate based on the average amount of impervious area for a single-family or duplex property in Fitchburg. It's 3,700 square feet. So that 3,700 square feet is considered one equivalent runoff unit, or an ERU. So every single-family home pays, for one ERU, one equivalent runoff unit. And then, of course, you've got your multifamily, non-residential properties, industrial properties. Those are actually based off of their actual impervious area on site. So anytime there's a new, let's say it's a new business that comes in, we'll go through their plans, we'll figure out, how much impervious area is there on the site, parking lot, roof, anything where water isn't going to absorb into the ground. That number is used to calculate a specific fee that they'd be paying quarterly. And then, of course, you've got your undeveloped properties. They do not pay a stormwater utility fee. So that's basically any property that doesn't have any impervious area on it. And then there's another component that kind of separates out rural versus urban customers. As you can imagine, in the urban service area of the city, there's a lot more storm sewer infrastructure, right? Because we've got curb and gutter, we've got storm sewer, we've got, there's way more ponds in the urban service area. Once you kind of get into the southern 2/3 of the city, or the more rural area, the stormwater infrastructure is mostly ditches and culverts primarily. And there's just, there's less cost. There's also less runoff because there's less development. So, again, that's a way to be reasonable and fair, and have them pay a lesser fee than urban properties. And then I think I discussed the credit policy. So yeah, if you have a private BMP on your site, you can apply and get some kind of a credit. And that can be even a single family, homeowner. If you have a rain barrel, you can get a credit for that. If you have a rain garden, you can get a credit for that. Those are smaller credits than what's offered to the non-residential properties, but that's really just due to the scale that non-residential properties have to implement to meet their stormwater requirements.
How many single-family homes with rain barrels apply for this?
Not many.
Yeah.
Not many. Know? Yeah, I could look. I don't have the number on me, but I could see how many.
Do you know the average cost savings of that?
It's sparse. It's like $5.
$5?
Yeah, it's limited.
Okay, fair.
And the barrel costs you.
When we created the stormwater utility, I know for simplicity, I don't think we created that term equivalent residential unit. I think that's something that developed later. But we basically said anything that's a single family zoning would be charged this rate. And it didn't matter whether that lot was 4,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet. They were just getting charged one rate for being a single family residential lot.
The ERU equivalent runoff unit, I think that actually was part of the original financing report that was completed. So at that time, they looked and figured out what that average impervious area on each single family home was. And then, like you said, just to simplify things, and that's still the way it is today.
Is that still a reasonable way to go about it? That somebody who's living, say, in the Highlands of Seminole, who's got a 10,000, 15,000 square foot lot, would be paying the same rate as someone living in Terra Vesa, for example, who's got a 5,000 square foot lot.
Well, that's certainly something that could be discussed. I can say, for example, the city of Madison, even if it is a single family home, they have a calculation of how much impervious area is on your single family home. So if you live in the city of Madison, those rates do vary. But it is fairly common in other stormwater utilities to have kind of that simplified flat rate for single-family homes. I've seen examples of both, but certainly something that could warrant discussion if that's something that there was interest in changing.
And then I think we are charging the same rate if you have a duplex lot, right? If you have a duplex on one lot.
That is correct.
And so presumably the duplex has more impervious surface than a single-family home would.
On average, probably, but going back to your example, I'm sure there's homes, single-family homes that are.
Well, yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah, but there are some single-family homes that are really, really big.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah, I think it's probably something worth exploring. I realize that converting, we'd probably have to bring somebody in to do all those conversions, because going through every single lot and figuring out what the ISR is for each one of those is going to be time consuming.
There are some new GIS, so Geographic Information System, software programs, AI, that's a big buzzword right now, but it's basically a program that can look at an aerial and discern impervious area from non-impervious area. So there are companies out there right now that will do that for you and go parcel by parcel and provide you with that. Now, of course, you're depending on a computer program. What's the accuracy of that? I've seen some different claims. 90% plus accuracy. But certainly, if that was a direction that the city wanted to go, I think there's tools out there now that can be used to make it less of a lift.
And then we should think about what happens when things change. The mayor just sent us an email about some zoning code changes she'd like to see, and one of them is to allow for accessory dwelling units, which would presumably increase the ISR on a given lot. And so that should be taken into account also.
You could dive pretty deeply into it, yeah.
Sure.
Yep. All right, so maintenance responsibilities. I've got just a picture here of the city of Fitchburg's stormwater utility maintenance plan. Here's our crew in the photo there, digging out an old culvert in the process of replacing it with a new concrete one. But the stormwater utility has a lot of infrastructure that needs to be maintained. So it's your inlets, your manholes, your sewers, your greenways, your ponds, your ditches, your culverts. It's quite a bit. So just some rough numbers. There's about 1,300 manholes, about 4,000 inlets, 83 miles of pipe, 210 outfalls, about 110 BMPs, and about 45 acres of greenway. So that's kind of the meat of the stormwater utilities infrastructure that needs to be maintained. I will say Fitchburg is maybe in a little bit of a unique situation, just where it's a city that's, a lot of the development is more recent. Certainly I think within the last 50 years, I think that would be a fair thing to say. There's been a huge amount of growth in that time. And I think, particularly, in the 80s, 90s to now, even really the last 40 years. But the reason I mention that is, the city installs reinforced concrete pipe and reinforced concrete inlets and manholes. I expect that to last 75 to 100 years. There's concrete pipe in the ground that's over 150 years old and still works well. So county materials or any of your big concrete pipe manufacturers, they'll tell you it's a 100-year life expectancy. That would be ideal, but 75 to 100 years. So a lot of the infrastructure in the city is really still in pretty good shape. So anytime we resurface roads or do any kind of a crack sealing or chip sealing project, we go out, we look at the storm infrastructure, see if there's anything else that we want the contractor to do while they're out there. The condition of the inlets, the pipes, they're just not at their end of their life yet, generally. Of course, there's a picture of a culvert that needed to be replaced there, so we're having to replace things. But that's going to be more something that, later on you might see some more, bigger storm sewer replacements due to failure. So, really most of the projects that the stormwater utility has been doing is it's not ripping out old storm sewer to put new storm sewer in. It's more so, building ponds, adding capacity. So most of the work isn't necessarily done because of infrastructure failure. Like I said, though, that's something that, will have to be considered down the road more so. Obviously, still an important thing to budget for, but like I said, a lot of newer stuff that's still young, I guess you could say.
Do we keep a list of like the different facilities and when they were installed and things of that nature?
Yes, and regrettably, I didn't think of that when I was putting this presentation together. But I can get everyone a map that kind of shows, color coded. Hey, this pipe was installed in the 80s. All this was in the 90s. All this was in the 2000s. So we keep track of that in our GIS system for asset management purposes, because that would be a cool thing to show, and I regret not having that prepared for
maybe we
tonight's
can pull up
presentation.
The GIS map later.
We'll see.
But it's just interesting because this is way beyond the scope of the CIP. In terms of you're talking about maintenance schedule timelines of 100 years out in the future. So it seems like it presents a unique challenge.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's why there's some I think flexibility in the CIP with some of the items in there. For example, there's a CIP project for drainage work. It's very kind of general. So that's could be a source of funding if there was ever a need. But yeah, most of the funding is really provided just through the operating budget. It's that is enough at this point to fund any kind of, it's really a lot of culvert repairs in the kind of more rural area. There's a lot of corrugated metal pipe that rusts. It doesn't, it doesn't give you 100 years. So it's really a lot of that kind of stuff. Not huge, we got to replace this mile of pipe. It's kind of these sections of old metal pipe that are, deteriorated at this point.
And I think Nicole had a question as well. Do you want to?
I did. Sorry, we were Googling outfalls to figure out what they were.
Yeah,
I promise it was on topic, this side conversation.
Yeah, in outfall, that's just a term we use for, say we've got a pipe, it's got all these inlets connected to it upstream, and then we've got this one pipe that's dumping out it's discharging to a pond or a creek, any kind of water body, really, a channel, that's an outfall. So it's kind of the discharge point of that storm sewer.
Yeah. Okay. I believe the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles also used it as an
Yeah,
entrance and exit.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
That was their front door.
That was their front door.
Which, thank you for that segue, because I was going to ask, what's the typical size? Sorry.
No. I actually liked that segue. I'd like to wait. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so water main is typically, less than 12 inches in diameter. What's the typical size for a stormwater sewer pipe?
Sure. So, the pipe that you'll see, coming out of one inlet, kind of the first pipe in a run, that's going to be a 12-inch pipe almost every time. And then it kind of steps up. You got your 12, your 15, your 18, your 21, your 24. Because, with water and storm sewer, or water and sanitary sewer, you kind of know how much, I guess I'll use sanitary as a better example. You kind of know how much, people are showering, people are flushing toilets. It's not like, with storm sewer where you get, 6 inches of rain falling from the sky and it's got to, then convey a huge amount of water. So, we've got outfalls that are 12 inches. There are outfalls that are 60 plus inches or, larger diameter box culverts. It can range greatly.
Nicole had a follow-up.
Yes. For the record, I'm actually glad that Bill went first because my question was on pipe size. So being in some parts of Seminole Forest and then some parts kind of up here off of Fish Hatch, some neighborhoods back here, I've had constituents reach out about like, hey, there seems to be flooding from after storms into my property. And I guess kind of a combination of the average size, but also to your point of like, those pipes are still in good shape. And to your point, we've had rapid development over the last 30 years. And so my question is there infrastructure that's still in good condition, so we wouldn't like rip it out, and should be bigger to accommodate all of the rapid development? And do we need to be planning and budgeting for that piece?
Well, I would much rather prefer to try to figure out a way to detain more water or infiltrate water so there's not a need for a larger pipe. That would be like another BMP, a big pond that kind of holds that water, allows things to settle. So, I think, my recommendation would always be to look at ways to infiltrate the water, detain the water, get some kind of a quality benefit. It's a developed urban area. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to do, and you might just have to increase the pipe size. So, for example, the city completed a project on Sherrill Drive recently where, the pipe they took out was fine. It probably had another 50 plus years. But there were flooding issues in the street. It was enough that it was kind of a public safety hazard. Now, that project, we were fortunate where we were able to kind of add in a water quality component. We widened out some channels to give a little bit a greater surface area for water to infiltrate, and amended the soil a bit there. But yes, that's kind of the difficulty when you're putting in infrastructure that can last that long, because you have to really try to design it for its its life expectancy, and with questions about climate change, probably getting more rain, or at least higher intensity storms being more common. The regulations or the data that engineers use to make those calculations to determine pipe sizing is maybe a little bit a step behind, what we see in reality with the climate. So it is a challenge. It's a challenge, yeah.
Jay.
Yeah, some time ago, maybe Dave, you'll remember when this happened. Along where the golf course is along Fish Hatchery Road, there's a retaining wall, and that retaining wall kind of collapsed into the sidewalk after a large rain event. Is that retaining wall covered by the stormwater utility at all, or is that not considered a stormwater facility?
I guess I'd have to see is the retaining wall part of? I would say no. I would just say no. Yeah.
Hey, Tim or Ben, you can address, our design is for, I believe it's the 100-year storm. Sometimes we get storms that are greater than that overwhelm our system. And you didn't design it right. Well, we could design everything for the 500-year storm, but then it would cost so much more. So we make a reasonable decision, and every once in a while we do get an event that overwhelms the system that was put in with best utility practice. So happens in my neighborhood, which was built in 1977. We've had storms where our intersection is flooded because the pipe can only get so much capacity, and those things happen. So is it the 100-year that we're probably designing the residential pipe for 100-year storm?
Yeah, so it's we kind of have some different standards. So we want the pipe to be able to carry a 10-year storm without any kind of surcharging. So assuming it's just flowing by gravity, the 100-year storm has to be kept within the right-of-way, and then a 500-year storm, we don't want structure damage. So those are kind of the guidelines.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if you could say a few more words about the Sherrill Drive issue. Was all of that excess flooding, that built up over time till we decided to do something about it, was that because of additional development that funneled more stormwater to that area, or do you think that was just because we keep getting a little wetter every year due to climate change?
Well, I don't have a ton of history on the issue. I've seen photos of some of the flooding that occurred there, more so within the last 10 years than, kind of getting the full picture of that of the Tower Hill development. I am not sure how much of a role development played, just because I think that watershed was largely built out for the most part. So I don't know if this was something that was happening like right as soon as everything was built out, or maybe we just didn't know about it. But certainly we got some photos. We could look back at approximately what the rainfalls were at that time and figure out hey, this is way more water that in the street right now than there should be based on the amount and pattern of precipitation that we received. So I would say it probably was more so. I guess I have a hard time believing it wasn't always at least some sort of an issue, but it was just exacerbated by these more intense storms that we've been seeing. All right, we'll get on to regulatory requirements. So that is one of the main things that the stormwater utility needs to make sure that the city's in compliance. We'll talk about the Federal Clean Water Act, Section 402. So that is the section that established the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES. I referred to the Wisconsin Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That's just the Wisconsin DNR's version of this EPA permit. So this is all under NR 216. The city has a municipal separate storm sewer system permit. In that permit, there's a bunch of requirements, some minimum control measures, also the Rock River TMDL requirements. And as far as compliance with water quality standards, so NR 102 through 105 in particular, basically what the permit says is by complying with the permit or adhering to the requirements of the permit, you are complying with the aforementioned water quality standards. So kind of getting into I'll call it the meat, so 6 minimum control measures that are outlined in the WIPD's permit. There are some other requirements, but these are the 6 minimum control measures. So I'll just kind of go through each one and some examples of what the city does and, you know, what activities fall under each one of these minimum control measures. So public education and outreach, there's requirements for that. So the city pays into MAMSWAP to fund basically an education and outreach coordinator for Dane County. So this is something that all the MAMSWAP communities pay into. And then this coordinator assists with putting classes together, you know, different presentations, going to different events to table, all things like that. You know, the city also provides brochures. If you go down to City Hall, you'll see there's brochures on different stormwater opportunities, social media posts. You know, we recently had a sweeper art contest, so maybe you've seen the street sweeper. It's got some art from 2 different local students. That was very fun. I wish we could buy another street sweeper so we could do that again. And then things like murals. So there's a couple stormwater murals throughout the city. The next public involvement and the next control measure is public involvement and participation. So that's things like, you know, this is an example of public involvement and participation. I wish there was maybe more of the public here, but you know, that is something that is listed in the permit, you know, as an allowable activity for this public involvement and participation section. Also, the city has waterway cleanups annually. We've done some rain garden coaching. We'll be doing that, I guess, this upcoming weekend already. So those are a few examples of the public involvement and participation. The next section is illicit discharge detection and elimination. So every single year, we'll basically wait a few days since any kind of rainfall. So we'll say 72 hours since there's been any rain. And then we'll go to these outfalls. There hasn't been rain, so there shouldn't be anything coming out, right? There shouldn't be any discharge. And we verify that there isn't. If there is discharge, we do have some testing equipment, so we can test for some common contaminants, just different detergents, some metals, things of that nature. And if we do detect something like that, then, you know, we notify Dane County Public Health, DNR, and then we try to work upstream to figure out where that discharge is coming from. You know, I guess I'm happy to say that the outfall inspections have been pretty uneventful, which is a good thing, meaning we're basically just seeing dry pipe when we do these outfall inspections. So in the few years I've been here, we've done a couple tests, found that it was likely, you know, well, flushing a hydrant was one instance. Someone was just clearing out a hydrant, someone washing their car. So we didn't, you know, we haven't had any issues in that respect during our outfall inspections. And then spill reporting, documentation. Anytime there's a spill, even if it's just, you know, one of you know, a truck breaks a hydraulic line on the road. You know, we go out, we take pictures, we document it. When did it occur? Where did it occur? Take pictures of the cleanup to verify that everything was cleaned up. Make notifications if we have to. So, you know, you might, depending on what the spill is, you might be notifying the DNR. And then we just keep those records. Minimum control measure 4 is construction site pollutant control. So that's, you know, we're doing, if there's any kind of project that's disturbing ground, they likely need an erosion control permit. So we review their plans. The city ordinance has requirements for what needs to be included in erosion control plans and the permit submissions. And then we contract with Dane County for weekly site inspections. I did want to include that the permit actually only requires inspections once every 45 days, which that would be tough. So I think doing the weekly site inspections, which the city has been doing for quite a while, I guess to my knowledge, is definitely worth it. I think it really needs to be weekly, but those are kind of the items under construction site pollutant control. Then getting on to post-construction stormwater management. So this is the ponds, the BMPs. That's the post-construction stormwater management. So that's, again, plan reviews. The city has their ordinance with the different requirements for the plan and what kind of standards have to be met. Maintenance agreements. So the city gets stormwater maintenance agreements. The city inspects most, if not all, BMPs every year, depending on availability, and then annual reporting. So, we'll get annual reports from privately owned BMPs. That's all part of this post-construction stormwater management. And then finally, pollution prevention. So that's the city has a stormwater pollution prevention plan for the maintenance facility or the shop off of Fish Hatchery. They have oil containers there. They've got fuel, for their vehicles. So basically any kind of potential source of pollution is shown on a map, listing out the procedures for how often these tanks have to be inspected. They get monthly inspections to make sure there's no issues. There's also a spill prevention and control plan as part of this stormwater pollution prevention plan. So that kind of outlines, what happens if there is a spill, who do you call, what do you do, things of that nature. Whoops. And nutrient management. So the city's obviously got a lot of parkland, a lot of, soccer fields, baseball, diamonds. The city doesn't just go and dump fertilizer every year on all the playing fields. We take soil samples and then we send them to the UW lab and they'll analyze it for, your potassium, your phosphorus, your nitrogen content. And then they'll make recommendations, based on the actual nutrients in the soil. And then there's other small things, just like providing dog waste bags. Pet waste is a somewhat significant source of pollution in urban areas. Keeping track of our BMP inventory, updating it as needed, tracking salt use, street sweeping. The city picks up a huge volume of just, I guess, sand, grit, urban detritus, whatever you want to call it, and sends that to the Dane County landfill, so it doesn't, it's not getting, just sent directly into our waterways. And then things like salting or tracking how much salt that we use. That's another thing that is a key part of the MS4 annual reporting. Obviously, chlorides can be detrimental to many different ecosystems, so limiting that and as much as is reasonably possible is important as well.
After that,
Sure.
So as you've been talking, I've been thinking about a bunch of these things. Like most of our residents put salt on their driveways or sidewalks in the wintertime when there's ice. And so does that salt somehow get accounted for? Also, a lot of our residents have underground sprinkler systems that run at night and obviously have some runoff associated with those. And then you mentioned briefly people washing cars with detergents and whatever else might be in the water that makes its way down into, whatever stormwater system is nearby. How do those things get accounted for, or do we just ignore those?
So yeah, the car washing, that's not considered an illicit discharge. If you want to be, the most environmentally friendly, I guess you'd go to a car wash because then everything, is treated. But, people like to wash and wax their cars out in the driveway, certainly. But that wouldn't be considered an illicit discharge. It's kind of like pool water, people that have to empty their pools. As long as it's sat out without being rechlorinated and the chlorine is allowed to dissipate, that's not considered an illicit discharge. And as far as salt used privately, we're not able to track that. So the only thing that gets tracked is what the streets department puts on the roadways. In that, we know how much we order, how much goes in each truck. So that's a fairly easy thing for the city to track.
Well, it does seem like some of the commercial users that have really large parking lots are using a really large amount of salt. Obviously not as much as the city uses on the streets, but that's still got to have a measurable impact.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yep. So that's, there was a bill that, went through legislature last year. It was a liability bill. They were looking at, maybe reducing the liability of businesses. So there's been different ideas, I guess, is all I mean to say, to try to, salt smarter. I think the reality is until something new comes along, probably not going to stop salting. That could be a potentially huge public safety issue. So I don't know if it's realistic to say that, we'll just never use salt again, but using, the goal is to use as little as possible to get the results you need.
So as another follow-up to that, as I'm just sitting here thinking about more things, so the salt, that'll, over time, that basically dissolves and makes its way through the stormwater system. But we also use some sand on the roads, and the sand, if it goes down into the storm sewer, just kind of, it's not going to dissolve. So do we have to clean sand out of the stormwater, whatever you called those things, inlets or whatever, inflows?
So, the thing about chloride is once it's in the water, the city's not getting it out. That would require a treatment level that people aren't doing to stormwater. But with sand, as soon as it hits a pond, it's a fairly large particle, it's going to drop out. So that's why the city needs to dredge ponds every once in a while, because a pond has to maintain a certain depth of water to function the way it's intended to. So yeah, I mean, you wish we didn't, it'd be best if nothing had to be put down on the roads, of course. Sand you can get out, but yeah, the chloride, once it's dissolved, it's pretty much there to stay.
RCC has been talking about this for years and has done a lot of public communication about it with their public events, and also the city does social media posts. One of the simple things that I wish people would do is just sweep it up once it's dry and use it again. It saves you a ton of money. But yeah, that public use of salt is a tricky one. I think Bill had a question, so let's do Bill and then Dave.
Yeah, I guess regarding salt, I think I've asked you this question at an RCC meeting, but I use, probably 50 pounds of salt in my water softener every 6 weeks or something. How does the salt use of water softeners within the city compare with what we sprinkle on the sidewalk in the wintertime?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what, everyone here knows that the water is extremely hard. I'm sure everyone's had the experience of having to descale their coffee pots way more often than they would like. So with that, everyone's also got water softeners, and the latest data that I've seen is the water softening is actually a bigger contributor to chlorides than the road salt is. Because people are putting, it's not just in the winter that you're dumping salt in your softener. It's year round. I think it was pretty close between the road salt and water softener salt, but I think the water softener salt actually was a slightly bigger contributor to chloride than the road salt was here.
Wow. Dave?
The manager from Madison, the Metropolitan Sewage District, indicated that it was like 10 truckloads of salt I forget what the interval was, if it was every week or every month is the equivalent to what comes through the Madison Met plant. Could you talk a little bit about the cycle of a new development? They put in a stormwater pond as part of it, and it gets deeded to the city. And just talk about the cycle when 5M. I'm assuming once it goes in, the construction's done. That's the single biggest event, because you've had bare ground, and do we typically dredge it then? Do we have them dredge it, and then that's our starting point for the stormwater pond that gets deeded to the city?
Yeah, so I guess it starts with it starts at the plat, but we'll say it starts at when they submit their stormwater management application. So once we get that application, if it's a stormwater facility that is going to be dedicated to the public, then that's going to be reviewed by myself, other staff, Dane County. So there's quite a few eyes on it for those kind of stormwater facilities. And we'll scrutinize those pretty heavily because obviously it's going to be the city's. It needs to be designed the way the city wants it. So once, we've got an approved design, it goes out into construction. Depending on their erosion control plan, they may use that pond during construction as a sediment basin, in which case then, they'd have to see, all right, is there enough accumulated sediment that they'd have to dig it out? I think the best practice there is just to have them dig it out deeper to begin with. Yep. So then they don't have to go back and dig it out again later. But yeah, so they build it, construction's done, we get an as-built survey, we go out, we take a look, we look at the vegetation, and I'll say any publicly owned stormwater facility has to have, I think it's 4 years now of vegetation management that's paid for by the developer, basically to make sure that the native vegetation that we require is actually established, and that takes longer than just a year. So that's why there's that kind of longer term for that component. But once we have that as-built survey, there's not any, more significant sources of, construction runoff that could fill it up, and basically make that as-built survey meaningless. So once we're feeling okay with where the site is, we get the as-built survey. If it all checks out, meets the plan drawings, it's got enough volume, it's built to the right elevations, then the city will accept that facility.
Thank you.
All right, and then I just wanted to highlight a select few projects here, just kind of examples of some stormwater utility projects. So, this first one, the TMDL water quality model update, which I was here recently discussing, that's an example of a study. The stormwater utility funds other studies. They did one in, Dunn's Marsh, for example. You doing things like the burn pond retrofit. So this was an existing kind of quasi-infiltration basin conveyance channel that was basically retrofit to provide more TSS and phosphorus control. You completed some dredging in 2023, the Sherrill Drive stormwater improvement. So that was largely a capacity-driven project, but we were also able to get some water quality improvements implemented with that project as well. We're currently working through this Goose Lake, Fitch Run Road stormwater improvement project. So this is ongoing, haven't started construction yet. So that's, again, more of like a study at this point. 2025, we are looking to do more dredging and repair an infiltration basin. So this is all the maintenance of all those, 110 BMPs. Got to keep on top of that. Yarmouth Greenway stream bank restoration. So that's, again, we've got a greenway that has some pretty severely eroded side slopes. It appears that there's, significant sediment load sloughing off from the slope, so we're looking to get that repaired. And then looking at, potentially some sort of a regional infiltration facility over by the Lacey and Seminole intersection. So just a few kind of examples of the projects that the stormwater utility funds. I did throw a couple pictures in here. Here's that burn pond that I talked about. Here it is in 2014. Basically just has a concrete channel down the middle. Heavy rains, the water kind of washes out into the grass area to infiltrate. So this is what it was before, kind of a typical, probably was constructed in the 90s, pretty typical for that time period. So here it is under construction. They got rid of that channel. The issue with that channel is in your smaller rain events, it's just going down concrete, so there's no opportunity for water to infiltrate, whereas here, there's no concrete channel. Water is immediately hitting soil, so I completed some soil amendments, got some better vegetation in there. And if you were to go out, around now, it would look something more like this. So it's not the turf grass. There's native vegetation that we're still working on establishing. But a big change, I guess, for the area. So and here's just a picture of pond dredging. So this is the West Chapel Valley Pond. It was pretty full. Or at least a portion of it was. So, pretty simple. They're just excavating all this material that has accumulated over the years. And you get, something like this, you restore it, and you get that water depth restored to what it needs to be.
Where does that sediment go again? Did you say it goes to the landfill?
Yeah, so we... It can go to the landfill. I think it was the street sweepings that I referenced as going to the landfill. So when we do these dredging projects, we get soil samples or samples of the material to be dredged, get them tested for contaminants. It's mostly heavy metals. Wisconsin, it's like Administrative Code 428 or 5, I don't remember, but it outlines, what contaminants, pollutants need to be tested for when you're doing these dredging projects. If your results, if your contaminants are below the required thresholds, you can land spread it. But if they're above those, threshold levels, then it does have to go to a landfill that can accept that. So for all of our projects, none of the sediment samples that we took had contaminant levels over the threshold. So the contractor was allowed to take this off-site to their one of their yards.
You also presented this at Rural and Ag, right?
Yeah, we're
Bringing
looking
it
at
to-
potentially beneficial reuse of dredged materials as a soil amendment.
Like here in Fitchburg on Fitchburg lands, which was kind of a cool conversation.
Yeah, so that's something to stay tuned for. It'd be nice if that material could be reused locally.
Aren't most of those ponds clay lined?
Many of them are, yes, and that is always something to look for when you're doing those dredging projects. You need to know if, hey, was this pond lined with clay? Because if you puncture into that clay, you could potentially have a leaking pond, which is not what you want.
Right. The DNR looks down on that. How thick is the clay typically?
2 feet thick.
Well, all right. So presumably the stuff that we're dredging is softer than the clay, right?
It is obvious where the clay liner is. Yeah, it's a clear, you're dredging and immediately when you hit the clay. Yeah. And then last one here is the Sherrill Drive project I referenced earlier. So, this looks like a pretty old car here. So I don't remember the date. This was just one of the pictures on our network drive that I thought kind of really showed the issue pretty well. So yeah, I mean, the street's completely flooded with water up into the park. It's out of the right of way. This project, mostly everything was underground, so I didn't have a cool picture to show you, just this plan sheet here. But yeah, so this is, like I said, there was a pipe here that was it was in fine condition, but it was removed to put in this larger box culvert. And then I also said we were able to widen out the existing channel. So we were able to do that to at least get some kind of additional water quality benefit with the project.
Now, was that project paid for by the stormwater utility, or was that done by an area assessment?
So that project was funded by the stormwater utility, and there were actually some ARPA funds used for this project as well. But primarily stormwater utility rates funded this project. And then vegetation management, so that's a big component. We want to see native vegetation at all our stormwater utility sites. So here's Harlan Hills East in 2021 before we really had any work done. And here it is in 2024 after years of vegetation management. So this is kind of what we really want to be seeing at our stormwater utility sites. Diverse plant species, you got some milkweed, some brown-eyed Susan, other stuff there. So, that's another component that, I just wanted to mention as well. And with that, we'll open it up to any questions. Yes.
I know you mentioned on one of the slides a federal Clean Water Act, I think you mentioned.
Section 402. Yep.
So with the new Trump administration in office and their persistence on deregulation, has there been anything at the national level that's kept you from kind of managing the city as you see fit? Are there any concerns that you have, or anything that you've seen come through that just causes you worry or issue?
Well, that's a tough question. I can't say that I know of anything that is for sure going to happen that will, be detrimental to what the stormwater utility is trying to accomplish. But I don't know, I guess there's unknowns at this point.
Is the majority of the regulation that we follow as a city state?
Yeah, so the
State regulation?
The WDNR, Wisconsin DNR, is really the authority. They have the authority through EPA for their Wisconsin, their WIPD's permit. So, they're really the entity that the city works with and reviews our MS4 reporting and
Things seem to be state referenced.
Yes,
So, okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for that perspective.
Could you talk a little bit about how you interact with the plan department during the process that they go to before you hit an approval for something comes to the plan commission?
Yeah, so it really starts at once a plat or a CSM comes through, that's when all the departments are kind of looking at it. So there'll be, not just me, but transportation engineer, utility engineer, director of public works, planning. We kind of all look at these plans at the same time. We type out our comments. Note any concerns that we may have. If there's anything that, warrants further discussion amongst, different staff, then we have those discussions. It's a pretty small office, so it's always very easy to get into our planning and zoning administrator's ear if there's any concerns or anything like that come up.
Dave.
For the council, what do we take in yearly in stormwater, stormwater fees to residents, and what did we do last year? Just to give them a sense of that budget.
Yeah, I should have brought the exact number for you.
I could have asked you before. I'm sorry. Yeah.
About $2 million.
Okay.
Chad would like to make a comment.
Ben, a couple of things. Thanks for the information this evening, first and foremost. But to follow up on Alder Gerhardt's question about your work with the planning department when new developments are submitted, using an example, maybe a residential development south of here, Highfield Reserve, for instance, when that platting process comes through, are there any other entities besides city stormwater engineers or engineers that are evaluating the stormwater management practices, not only for just the development as a whole after it's constructed, but also during that construction phase?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's not just city staff. So, there's a few different entities I'll list here. One, there's Dane County Land and Water Resources, because we contract with them, so we are able to also utilize their expertise on reviews. But then also, of course, the DNR. So any site that disturbs greater than 1 acre of land needs to get a construction runoff permit from the DNR. And then you also have the Capital Area Regional Plan Commission, CARPC, that has environmental engineers on staff. And then they'll, review, in many areas there's a resolution that CARPC provides at the time of the neighborhood plan approval that discusses, anything that, is a requirement. For example, Hartung, where there was a requirement for 100% stay on versus the typical 90%. Initially it wasn't submitted correctly, so we were able to figure that out and get the right information and get what we needed. But yes, there are other entities outside of just city staff that look at that.
So in addition to obviously you and your cohorts in the city, ensuring that all of the appropriate or required regulations and codes are met. There are other entities in the county and the state and the Regional Planning Commission that are also ensuring that all of the regulatory matters are met as it relates to stormwater management.
Yeah, as far as the development, as far as they relate to development, yeah.
Sure. And then if I remember correctly, if I may continue, you had mentioned during the construction process that we contract with Dane County to do weekly site inspections versus
the once every 45 days.
Yeah, which is the regulatory mandate. Could you describe, how Dane County would handle a situation if they did that inspection for us on our behalf and they noticed that there was a violation?
Yeah, I can use an example from today. So my coworker at Dane County did their inspections today. I got an email. It was a notice of non-compliance. So I get that email. They were given a timeline to fix it, and tomorrow we will make sure that it was corrected. So anytime there's an issue, there'll be a notice of non-compliance issued. We'll be made aware of that, and then we'll make sure it's been corrected. And then there's things like citations and stop work orders that can be used if needed to get the corrections made.
So relatively speaking, obviously there are, potentially, mitigating factors to any sort of situation, but whenever you're made aware of a complaint or concern related to stormwater management or construction related erosion control, you get after that as quickly as can be reasonably expected and look to get those situations resolved?
Yes, and in fact, if anyone notices some kind of illicit discharge or erosion control issue, if you're out walking around or driving, please let me know. I do want to know about it because I do want it needs to be corrected.
And one last thing, if I may, I think you've been with the city about 3 years or so, is that correct?
Coming on 3 years.
You'd mentioned that some of the mechanisms that we have in place, if there isn't compliance, is a stop work order or a citation. This is much like Alder Herbst. I could have potentially prepped you for this question in advance, and I'm sorry I didn't.
How many?
Yeah, but I'm curious if you have an estimation of how many stop work orders and or citations have been issued in the time you've been with the city?
Stop work orders, I want to say 4. Citations, more than that, dozens. Dozens. I could probably look back and figure out exactly how many that is.
Yeah, and my apologies for putting you on the spot with that. Like I said, we had not discussed this in advance, but ultimately the point being is that whenever you don't gain the compliance that's needed with any of the stormwater control measures, you're taking diligent efforts through stop work orders and or citations to gain that compliance.
What we have found is saying the word stop work order is usually enough to get things on track.
That gets someone's attention.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes, yep, correct.
Other questions? I'm curious, I just want to make the point, there's a public GIS map available on the Fitchburg website that's like one of the coolest things on the city's website that no one knows about, and I wish more people would look on it, but I was just looking briefly while Ben was talking, and you can zoom in at where your house is, and you can look at every single individual stormwater facility, click the box, and it shows you where it is. So you can learn, and that's true for every type of public facility, the sidewalks and the storm facilities and the water, all of it is on there. So if you're curious about the infrastructure of the city and what's around you, you can look at it yourself, and it's kind of neat to see what's around and how frequent it is. So we're actually gonna, next meeting, we're gonna have a presentation from Dakota about the GIS work in the city, he's our GIS specialist. So that's really exciting. I'm very much looking forward to that, as I'm kind of a nerd about in that way. Any other questions from the? Oh, Dave.
On the stormwater, occasionally, we'll get complaints about mosquitoes, and residents will ask, why can't we put aerators in the ponds to do that? Can you address that for people?
Aerators?
Why we can't? why we're
Yeah.
not allowed to do that.
No, I've heard them called particle resuspenders. Basically, you're mixing up that, the point of the pond is you've got this, big, at least 3 foot deep minimum, 5 feet really. You get your stuff that goes in there, your sand, your clay particles, and then it can all just kind of settle out slowly in that nice still water. But once you start, moving the water around, then those particles, they don't settle out quite right. They can get resuspended even. Now, there might be some aerators now that don't quite have that, kind of same action that's really causing sediment to be stirred up. But it's an interesting topic. It's something that maybe could be explored, and actually not just due to the mosquitoes. There's certain instances where, each pond is kind of like its own ecosystem. It's got its own water chemistry. There could be instances where a little oxygenation might be beneficial to a pond, actually. But this is pretty recent research, so there's not, necessarily standards out for kind of aerating ponds at this point, but a lot of interesting work from the University of Minnesota on that topic recently.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think people don't really know that. I think people think of stormwater ponds as a place to hold water during a storm, and they don't think about it as a place where it's a water quality feature to have particles settle out.
Yep.
It's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what a stormwater pond is there for, which makes perfect sense because why would you don't intuitively know that, but when you know that, it changes the perspective about what the purpose of that facility is.
You want to see frogs go around our stormwater ponds. They are literally loaded with frogs. Yes, go to the one, the Sub-Zero one over there. You walk around that pond and it's just splash, splash, splash. I've never seen, I've been around ponds. I've never seen so many frogs.
McKee Farms Park as well. Come April, you'll hear all the peepers and you'll be able to see them all.
They eat mosquitoes.
Yeah.
I don't think it's good or bad.
It's good to have them. No, very
Yeah.
good to have them. It's an indicator of the health of the ecosystem too.
Ben, can you comment on the aerator in the McKee Farms Park South Pond? I see that running from time to time.
Yeah, that pond is probably big enough compared to the aerator, where the particle resuspension isn't going to be necessarily as big of a concern. But I don't have too much more to say about the aerator there.
Isn't that one owned by the condo association? Didn't they buy it?
No.
Well, they bought one, or they bought the original one.
I'm pretty
I
sure.
remember when they bought it and they said they were going to take care of maintaining it.
I'm part of that condo association. I'm pretty sure we don't own the pond.
Yeah,
No,
certainly not
but
the pond.
But they
right.
owned the aerator. They bought
Oh.
the original aerator that was put in that pond.
Anyway, interesting question. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, want to thank Ben for taking the time to come out. It's a really interesting and important part of the city infrastructure. Any last comments?
Well, thank you for all your time, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Wonderful. Next item of business is item 7, announcements. Our next committee of the whole meeting will be March 19, 2025. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned at 8:27 p.m. Thank you.